Hey everybody, welcome back to Summit. My name's Mark. We're taking a look at the Feast of the Transfiguration. Now, the Transfiguration, this gospel story, is one we hear every year, sometimes a couple times a year. And I think when you hear a story a lot of times, we can kind of go into mental autopilot. We don't really necessarily listen to the whole thing, or we kind of get the basic gist, right? Jesus is going up top the mountain with Peter, James, and John, the close three. He has his 12, but he has his closest three, Peter, James, and John. So Peter, James, and John and Jesus go up the mountain, right? They go up the mountain to pray. It's typically called Mount Tabor, right? We hear about that. So they're up on top of the mountain, and all of a sudden, Jesus is going to be transfigured, right? His clothes are going to become radiant. His face is going to just shine like the sun. And he's going to be there with Moses and with Elijah. Now, because we've heard this story before, and Peter's like, hey, let's throw up some tents, let's hang out. And we kind of lose the basic gist of the story and the background of the story. Why is this story so important? Well, one, because it's going to reveal God's glory, right? He's going to see we're going to see God in his glory, and it's going to be a foreshadowing of our glory, our future glory, when we are with God forever in eternal life in heaven, right? And Peter says, let's throw up a tent, and the actual word for tent is tabernacle, right? So the presence of God, right? You get this? So all this is going on, but we don't understand maybe necessarily is why is Moses there? Why is Elijah there? Well, because Moses represents the law, and Elijah represents the prophets, and that represents the Old Testament. And Jesus is trying to say the Old Testament and the New Testament, this is all coming together now, guys. I'm going to show you something, okay? And this is an all-time epic thing. What we don't necessarily understand is that Moses had some really amazing, intimate encounters with God on top of a mountain also. And his face shined like the sun. And there was one point where Moses went up the mountain with three of his closest friends when he had this amazing opportunity, right? You may not understand that Elijah also had some really important encounters with God on mountains. You're like, well, why the mountain? Because God's trying to make sure everybody's in shape. No, because when you go up a mountain, it changes your perspective on things, right? When you ascend, you start to see things from a higher level, and you start to see the world differently. Your perspective changes. You see things from an elevated glance, almost like God in heaven looking down upon us, his people. But this first reading, we're going to hear this really apocalyptic literature, this vision that happens in the book of Daniel. And in the second reading, we're going to hear from St. Peter, okay, in the second Peter, saying, listen, we don't follow a myth. We follow a person. We follow power. We follow Jesus. He says, because we witnessed what happened, okay? He's referring back to the Transfiguration. He's referring back to moments like this that he witnessed with his own eyes. He's referring back to times when he saw Jesus risen from the dead. So St. Peter's trying to tell everybody in the second reading, we're not following myths, people. We're following Jesus. We're following power because we've witnessed the power ourselves. But in the first reading from Daniel, this is being written in a time where the Jews are being persecuted and they're away in captivity. In the gospel, Jesus shows them this. He transfigures and he gives them this vision of his glory when? Right after he told them how he's going to have to suffer and he's going to have to die. So after he reveals this sad truth of what's going to happen, he gives them the happy truth later on. This is the way God works, okay? That he's going to give us what we need in the moments that we need it to carry us through. You might think you're on your own. You may be having a really bad day, and all of a sudden, God's going to send someone into your life who's going to speak a word of love, speak a word of mercy, make you laugh, offer a smile. It could be a stranger, it could be a loved one, it could be a friend, it could even be an enemy. You never know. But the reality from Moses to Elijah to Peter to St. Paul, from the Old Testament to the New Testament, is that God is always the same. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And he's always going to be with us in those moments of suffering and persecution and desolation and isolation. He's going to be with us. He's going to remain with us. Why? Because he loves us. And if we lean into him and we trust in him and we go to him on top of our own mountain in the tabernacle, those mountaintop experiences, in adoration at Mass, if we go to him in prayer and we lean into him, then one day you and I, like him, will be glorified. God bless you.